Hey, welcome back to the show. Today would be the National Championship recap. That's what this video will be focused on. So let's dive right into it. Um, Honestly, as a Michigan fan, it's 72 hours now, as of the time of this recording, since the game ended, and honestly, it's still surreal for me. Um, as a Michigan fan, the university as a whole in my lifetime has more or less kind of been the butt of the end of every joke. Um, such a prestigious school and a team for so many years in its history, but essentially since the turn of the century, it's been a rough ride for Michigan football. Whether it's in conference against Ohio State, it was a pretty long streak there where it was little to no success at all against them, or it's just success in general. Cycling through a couple coaches until we finally got it right, and even in Harbaugh's first 4 or 5 years, it was a rough ride. So it's been an interesting life as a Michigan fan, to say the least. Um, but I still 72 hours after, I can't believe it. Um, a part of me just kept waiting for something to go wrong in the game, and honestly, it was, in my opinion, it was too close for too long. I was very uncomfortable in the third quarter when it was still just a one-score game. Even though it didn't really feel like it at the time in the game, I was like, could not shake this feeling that somehow we were going to turn the ball over, something was going to happen, and it was just going to be too good to be true. But here we are. It's been a crazy 3 days of celebration, of emotion, of just everything that comes along with winning a championship. Um, so let's stop talking about me and my impact on it, or its impact on me, I should say. Let's get into the game. So honestly, the game never felt as close as the score was for most of it. It was 20-13 up until late in the third quarter, I believe it was, maybe early fourth, and it just never really felt that way. Michigan got off to a couple really early scores, big touchdown rushes by Donovan Edwards, and then even the drive after that, there was a 52-yard rush, I think it was, by Blake Corum that also put them right down there in field goal range. And so from the very beginning, it kind of felt like this is Michigan's game to lose, which they were favored and everything coming in, so it's understandable that it would be their game to lose in the first place. But Washington found a way to keep hanging on, like I kind of hoped for in my previous video. The game was really defensive, honestly, for most of the game from both teams. Even Washington's defense really kind of stood up and shut down the Michigan offense for about a 30-minute period. There was the early success for Michigan in the running game, and then the late success in the fourth quarter where they kind of pulled away. But that second and third quarter, those middle two quarters, was really a stalemate. It was Michigan not really having success on offense at all. Washington getting a little bit here and there, chipping away with a field goal and another field goal after that. But Washington did a really solid job in the middle of that game of shutting down Michigan and finding ways to keep the game within a score. But unfortunately for Washington, the explosive offense that they had all year that got them out of close games and got them out of bad situations, they just couldn't stack up to the Michigan defense, which it really bodes well for Michigan, and it really speaks to how they were the best defense in the country this year. In years past, especially with like Don Brown prior to and McDonald before Mentor, Michigan's had the number one ranked defense, but then when we get to the end of the year against teams like Ohio State or a bowl game, the Michigan defense kind of more or less shows its true colors. And it would struggle against those elite teams and those teams that are really dominant on offense. Um, so in this game, there was a part of me that thought that was going to be maybe what had happened because Michigan hadn't really faced an offense like that. I mean, Ohio State wasn't the same offense they were this year as years prior, just because of the fact that McCord's not C.J. Stroud and he's not Justin Fields. So even though they had the weapons on offense, the quarterback wasn't that guy that can really take you to church when it comes to your yards and your defense. But I had still thought like Penix and the Washington offense would be able to at some point break through and get that big play and make the game kind of go in their way in one way or another. But it didn't really happen, which is a good thing, obviously. Uh, and Dylan Johnson from the very beginning, it was clear that he was not 100%. From the very start, he didn't have that burst in his step, and you could see him limp off the field. He went from going out there untaped to a little bit taped to by the time the mid halftime hit, his whole right leg was taped up, and he just wasn't the impact. I mean, whether or not he was 100% or not, I don't know how much of an impact that would have had on the game, but he clearly was out there just playing through it just because he had to, which was the same for Penix. You could tell at some point, I'd say probably second quarter or so, one of the shots he took just hit him hard, and he was no longer the same threat as he was, in a normal day. And I think that may have had an impact on them trying to lead a resurgence in the second half and try to come back, because you could tell he didn't have the same zip on the ball. There are a lot of inaccuracies, things like that. Now, I mean, granted, the Michigan defense is not like a defense they played this year, so it could have also been a contributing factor as well. They were playing the best defense in the country. I don't know if Penix would have ever got the success we expected out of Washington's offense against other opponents, but it still did not bode well for them that two of their top weapons on offense were not 100% clearly through most of that game. Um, and Washington they honestly just missed a few really big opportunities that could have pulled momentum in their way. Some people aren't big believers in momentum. They don't think that it really matters, but especially early in the game, that drop by the wide receiver, I forget his name, um, but where he was open out heading towards the sideline, and it looked like either there was miscommunication on the route, miscommunication where the ball was going to be placed, but he looked left, looked right, and by the time the ball got to him, he just couldn't come down with it. And that really hurt them, because that was a point in the game where they really needed that spark. And if they could have got that big completion and put them down into Michigan territory, who knows? The momentum could have swayed their way, and they could have changed the tide of the game, because that was during the point in the game in which Michigan's offense was not executing. They also had a few just uncharacteristic misses by Penix, which, like I said, could also be related to the injury. But a few third downs where he had a guy open and just sailed it or grounded it or whatever it might be. And it was just clear that their offense didn't control the game. And in the previous episode, I had mentioned that that's how Washington was going to win. They would have to control the game. They would have to play Washington football. They couldn't play defensive Michigan football, because they're not going to win. That's how they make the name for themselves. That's how they got to where they are. And that's the kind of game that it was. And it really worked out well for Michigan, just as I predicted that it would, because Washington just can't keep up with that. They need to have those big explosive plays. They need to have that quick rhythm and everything. I mean, you saw Washington run up and do no huddle constantly throughout that game, and Michigan doesn't do no huddle. They're a huddle every down type of play, and so they really changed the pace of the game by doing that. And Washington just was not able to play their football the entire game, and I think that's why ultimately Michigan ended up coming out on top, is because Washington just couldn't. They never got that rhythm established, and they never got the game going in the way that they wanted it to be. I think if in that second and third quarter, when Michigan's offense wasn't clicking, if Washington could have hit a few of those big plays and put some points on the board, maybe we'd be talking about a different story. The momentum could have swayed their way. They could have forced Michigan to play with more urgency on offense and have to feel like they had to score, and McCarthy probably would have finished the game with more than 16 pass attempts or whatever it was he had. The Michigan would have felt like they had the need to throw the ball more and take more risk, and Washington could have capitalized on that with turnovers or sacks or whatever it might have been. But that never happened just because Washington could just never get ahead. From the beginning of the game, they were just trailing and trailing and trailing. And you could just tell that Penix felt as though he had to put the team on his back, especially with Johnson's injury and him not being 100%. Penix felt like he had to throw them to a victory, and he just was not able to do that. Even the second half, I believe it was their first drive when he threw the pick to Will Johnson. It was just one of those ones. Now replay showed it was tipped, and that probably had a big factor on how far the ball went. But he was getting pressured so hard, and he just threw it to try to get it away. And unfortunately for him, and fortunate for Michigan, it didn't make it to the sideline. And Will Johnson made an incredible interception and was able to get in bounce and come down with it. But even at that point, Michigan only got a field goal out of that. So Washington's defense was doing what they had to do to try to keep them in the game, but the offense just couldn't take it. And by the time they got to the fourth quarter, Michigan just unloaded the dogs. It was just every single play Penix was getting thrown around and knocked down, and by then he was already injured, but every hit that he took after that just made it even worse. So it was a rough game for him. And I don't take anything away from that from him. He's still going to be, in my opinion, early second round pick. If anything, somebody might look at the grit and toughness of that game and bump him a little bit more in their scouting report, honestly. But I don't take anything away from him. I don't think anything else he could have done in that game. It wasn't their game, honestly. Michigan showed up, established that they were playing Michigan football, and that Washington was going to have to play Michigan football to win, and they just couldn't do that. It's one of the best days of my life, sports wise. Michigan was the team, aside from my Canucks and hockey, that I was still waiting on to see like a real championship in my lifetime. I've seen the Pistons win one. I've seen the Eagles win one. The Canucks never won one, and Michigan had won one, but it was when I was so low that I don't remember it happening. I wasn't even an established Michigan fan then. But I'm incredibly happy about it. Like I said, 3 days of a lot of emotions and a lot of celebration and a little wee bit of rubbing it into some people. But it's been a good time. It's quite the experience to be there. Now, there's a lot of fallout from it. People are already talking about, is there going to be an asterisk with it because of the sign stealing and all that. And that's all a decision down the line. And if that does happen or whatever decision's made, I'll come back here and we'll talk about it. But as of right now, Michigan's national champions, and nobody can take that away from them until further notice. It's like I said, it's a good time. The game overall, not really the type of game a lot of people are going to see and want to see again, just because it's defensive, and most people want the 50-point blowouts, or they want the shootouts where it's 52 to 58. Those are the kind of games that most people want to see, because offense is what sells and offense is what gets your views. So a lot of people are going to say it's one of the worst national championships ever. I already saw comments online saying that this was supposed to be a matchup between two great quarterbacks, and they're both playing like shit. This should have been, Georgia should have been here, or this team should have been here, or Florida State should have made it, etc., etc. But that's just because people don't appreciate defensive football. So because the quarterbacks struggled because of how the defenses were playing, that obviously means the quarterbacks are bad, right? But yeah, that's basically it for the wrap up. Incredibly happy as a Michigan fan. Go blue, and hell of a game, Washington. You guys deserved everything you got, and keep fighting next year. And I can't wait to see you in the Big Ten. All right, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in. See you on the next one.